the 1960s, people marching for civil rights in the US were beaten in the streets. In the 70s, students protesting Vietnam were shot down cold by the National Guard. In the 80s, queer activists demanding AIDS treatment were labeled as degenerates. And in the 90s, those calling for sanctions on apartheid South Africa were called extremists. The people who were smeared, defamed, silenced, and surveilled by the government, and yes, often by liberal politicians themselves, ended up on the right side of history every time. Liberals may commission the boulevard names and the statues after the fight is won, but it's the left, the radicals, the internationalists, the socialists, who were there during the fight. There's a pattern here, a pattern of struggle, vilification, and eventually vindication. And that pattern repeats itself so consistently, you'd think more people would start to notice and occasionally point this out, which raises an interesting question for the present. If the left was right about Vietnam and civil rights and apartheid and Iraq, I mean, what are the chances that we've always been right about Palestine too? When we talk about the left being correct in hindsight, we don't mean like Democrats or liberals or some vague idea of progress. We're talking about those who stood against their own governments, against the dominant media narrative, and against politicians of all stripes. Remember, it was Lyndon B. Johnson who signed the Civil Rights Act, but it was also Lyndon Johnson who sent hundreds of thousands of troops to Vietnam. Being liberal on domestic issues didn't stop him from prosecuting an imperialist war abroad. It was the left, the anti-war radical, the black socialists, the internationalists, who saw the through line, who understood that racism at home and imperialism abroad weren't contradictions. They were part of the same system. And each time, the response is the same. Smear the radicals, censor the movement, but years later, rewrite history as if we were always on board. Martin Luther King Jr. was hated when he was alive. Nelson Mandela was on the US terrorist watch list until 2008. ACT UP was treated like a public menace during the AIDS crisis.
This beautiful day started with trouble in Lower Manhattan. More than 100 people were arrested during a protest.
And today, it's happening again. Pro-Palestinian voices are being surveilled, censored, arrested, even deported. And in Europe, people are being arrested for waving a flag or chanting a slogan.
NECAP have called the terror offence charge against one of their members political. A member of the Irish rap group was charged after allegedly displaying a Hezbollah flag.
Every generation has its own unique set of struggles that the ruling class tries to command us to ignore. But in due time, those who refuse to be bullied into submission are the ones who end up on the right side of history. In the 1980s, the CIA teamed up with Argentine intelligence to create the violent right-wing terrorist group the Contras, or counter-revolutionaries, in Nicaragua. The justification was framed as support for freedom fighters resisting communism. However, the Contras were responsible for over 1,300 documented terrorist attacks, according to the Global Terrorism Database. They targeted civilian infrastructure, schools, medical clinics. Reports from Human Rights Watch and the US Congress detail widespread abuses, including assassinations, torture, and attacks on innocent women and children.
Contra killers are called freedom fighters. Well, if crime fighters fight crime and firefighters fight fire, what do freedom fighters fight?
In spite of that, Ronald Reagan praised the Contras publicly as the moral equivalent of our founding fathers. I mean, maybe he was kind of right, just not in the way he actually meant it. The Boland amendments prohibited further funding, but the White House circumvented this through secret arms sales to Iran and illegal financial transfers, which is the scandal now known as Iran-Contra. In mainstream political discourse, this conduct did not delegitimize their cause. Their violence was normalized because it aligned with US strategic goals. The language of terrorism was not applied to them like it's applied to anti-colonial or anti-apartheid resistance movements. When resistance movements arise in opposition to US-aligned regimes or client states, the moral framing shifts. Their actions are described in isolation from their material conditions or political objectives. The assumption of criminality is embedded in the coverage. The notion of legitimate resistance becomes inaccessible to them. This pattern shows a real discrepancy in how violence is interpreted by the West.
Israeli murderers are called commandos. Arab commandos are called terrorists.
Tactical decisions made by favored groups are treated as unfortunate necessities, but identical actions by adversarial groups are treated as evidence of inherent illegitimacy. The categories of terrorist or freedom fighter is not applied based on actions, but on geopolitical alignment. So what's the difference? We're told that the precise reason that Palestinian resistance fighters are deemed illegitimate and evil is because they're supposedly intentionally targeting civilians. These tactics, whether they target civilians or not, don't actually play play a role in how a resistance group is labeled, according to the West. The only distinction that truly matters is whether you're on the side of U.S. empire or against it. Throughout modern U.S. history, support for liberation movements has been routinely treated as illegitimate until long after the violence has ended and the outcomes are settled. While protesters are active, they're denounced. Once their cause is safely historical, their images and slogans are reabsorbed by the institutions that once opposed them vehemently. In Vladimir Lenin's State and Revolution, he pointed out, quote, "During the lifetime of great revolutionaries, the oppressing classes constantly hounded them, received their theories with the most savage malice, the most furious hatred, and the most unscrupulous campaigns of lies and slander. After their death, attempts are made to convert them into harmless icons, to canonize them, so to say, and to hallow their names to a certain extent for the consolation of the oppressed classes." Lenin understood the ruling class can't admit that the left is actually correct in real time, because that would mean admitting their power is illegitimate. So they wait until the fight is over, until the radicals are dead or neutered, and then rewrite history to make it seem like everyone eventually just came around. But they didn't. The left led the way. The left was right, and the left paid the price. When resistance groups confront an empire, they are, without fail, always labeled as terrorists. But if they happen to be aligned with imperial interests, they're hailed as heroes. This precedent matters because it clarifies the structure of moral argumentation used in foreign policy media coverage. The same governments and institutions that once supported the Contras now shape the narrative around Palestinian resistance. Understanding that continuity is essential to identifying the actual basis of condemnation. It's not the presence of supposedly unforgivable violence, but the location of power. During the Vietnam War, activists faced surveillance, censorship, and police violence. They were portrayed as anti-American or unpatriotic. The FBI's COINTELPRO program infiltrated anti-war organizations and used disinformation to discredit them. Sound familiar? I actually wanted to get a screenshot of the FBI's COINTELPRO memo targeting Martin Luther King for his radical activities, but apparently it has now been scrubbed. Maybe they thought it was too woke. Despite this, popular support for the war eroded steadily as images of civilian casualties and military atrocities became impossible to suppress. Does that sound familiar? Today, very few public figures defend the US position in Vietnam, but the people who opposed it at the time were treated as damn near criminals. During the fight against apartheid in South Africa, the US government maintained diplomatic and economic ties with the apartheid regime. President Reagan vetoed a sanctions bill, arguing that punitive measures would destabilize a strategic ally. Anti-apartheid activists in the US were monitored and blacklisted. Like I said earlier, we, the US, labeled Nelson Mandela, who is basically held as a hero today, as a terrorist. In hindsight, this alignment with white supremacist rule is almost universally condemned. But at the time, bipartisan consensus framed divestment campaigns and international pressure as radical or irresponsible. Sound familiar? People in the West with a full belly sitting comfortably in a network TV studio are just aghast that Palestinians would dare to refuse to accept their oppression quietly and obediently.
Smug, greedy, well-fed white people have invented a language to conceal their sins. It's as simple as that.
Hey guys, if you like what you see, please consider giving me a like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you. Anyone being intellectually honest would admit to themselves that if they had happened to be born as a person in Gaza, it's not unthinkable that one would join resisting. Even Israeli prime ministers admit it.
Tell the truth, that if I were born Palestinian, I probably would have joined one of the terror organizations.
Palestinian resistance isn't framed as a response to occupation, displacement, or siege. The goal is to make Palestinian resistance seem like it emerged from nowhere. It's presented as chaos erupting out of the ether, as if it's random, senseless, a product of hatred rather than a material and completely predictable reaction to constant injustices imposed on them as a people for the past 78 years. But context gives resistance a logic, and that logic is very dangerous to systems built on domination. According to The Lancet, which is just a totally respectable weekly medical journal, Gaza's health system is being systematically dismantled, making it impossible to sustain Palestinian life in Gaza. The Israeli government has also targeted civilian infrastructure required for the survival of Palestinians, with 89% of the water and sanitation systems and 92% of the housing destroyed or damaged, with the displacement of around 90% of the population to overcrowded living spaces with little access to clean water and sanitation. Infectious diseases are rife. I mean, we're at that stage now where you can see the people being herded into more and more concentrated areas in Rafah with the assistance of US mercenaries and even ISIS-affiliated jihadist groups, which Netanyahu recently admitted to. Now, we're told that Hamas must be destroyed at all costs because radical Islam is a threat to Western civilization, but you're also supporting ISIS. I mean, that completely debunks your claim that you're motivated by taking out radical Islam. So, what are we left to believe? Wait, let me guess. The Lancet is part of the global Hamas support network now. They got to the Lancet. This is why we're told to equate any and all Palestinian resistance with terrorism. And it's why those who speak out are branded as dangerous sympathizers and relentlessly peppered with leading questions about whether they support Israel's right to literally exist as an apartheid ethno-state.
Do you believe that Israel has a right to exist?
Do you think Israel has a right to exist? Do you think Israel has a right to exist?
Do you support Israel's right to exist? Why not as a Jewish state? As a Jewish state?
Yes or no, do you believe in a Jewish state of Israel?
Not
as a Jewish state?
No.
As a state with equal rights?
Respect, it didn't sound like you were answering.
Can you imagine this dynamic existing for any other country? Now keep in mind that Zionism is the movement that advocates for a literal Jewish ethno-state at the exclusion of others. Try to think of any other circumstance where people would just act like it's totally beyond the pale to question whether it's okay to establish and colonize an ethno-state at the expense of an already existing population. I mean, we wouldn't, but for some reason all of that is just totally glossed over by corporate media and just assumed to be totally fine and normal. The Anti-Defamation League is blatantly misleading people under the guise of combating extremism, and the corporate media networks just play right along, totally aware of their disingenuousness.
Speaking about the New York Times doing a gauzy profile of this gamer Hassan Piker who regularly employs genocidal rhetoric against Jewish people.
If I do this enthusiastic hand motion, does that make me more believable? They are lying. Greenblatt knows that Hassan Piker does not adhere to any racist or anti-Semitic ideology. The radical left has always been the main enemy of anti-Semitic fascist regimes like the Nazis. We oppose the Nazis specifically because of their racism and anti-Semitism, and that racism being antithetical to every principle of the left. When people talk about some rising anti-Semitism on the left, they're pretty much always being disingenuous in some way. I mean, this is pretty sleazy stuff, I'm not gonna lie. Because anyone who sincerely engages with radical left thinking, whether they agree with the conclusions of it or the viability of it or not, knows that racism and nationalism and xenophobia or any of that stuff is literally the antithesis of it. By definition, if you believe in any type of hierarchy based on race or nationality or ethnicity, you're not on the radical left. Greenblatt is executing an intentional psyop on the American people. I'm sure he would deny it, but coincidentally or not, he's spearheading Project Esther. This is a mass propaganda campaign and authoritarianism blueprint that is the brainchild of the Heritage Foundation. I know that's a problematic word in Marxist circles, but I can't think of any other way to phrase what Trump is doing. It's just easier to say authoritarianism. The Heritage Foundation. Yes, the same organization who carefully crafted the logistical execution of the fascism we're living in here in the US as we speak. This report literally mirrors to a T what the Trump administration has been doing. I mean, there is no debating that they are following this exact playbook. It's happening with Project 2025 and it's happening with Project Esther. If you think this is just some kind of conspiracy theory, you're either not paying enough attention or you're being intellectually dishonest. I mean, they make the claim that these Hamas support organizations are corrupting the US education system. So they made up this scary HSO designation, Hamas Support Organization, as shorthand for any pro-Palestine organization. Their goal is to disingenuously conflate any pro-Palestine organization with the scary Hamas and therefore terror, as we've already discussed. And they try to confuse and scare people by equating DEI with Marxism, which DEI is quintessentially a liberal framework, not a Marxist one. And what has been all over the news ever since the administration has taken office? Trump pressuring higher education institutions, sometimes successfully, I'm looking at you, Columbia, cowards, into reorganizing their curriculum to fit with their reactionary agenda and getting rid of supposedly woke ideologies. I mean, this isn't about like sincere beliefs though, make no mistake, the root of this is about maintaining existing power structures. As I make this video, Republicans in Congress haven't even succeeded with the big beautiful bill yet, but you can be damn sure they have time to work on criminalizing the phrase Free Palestine as anti-Semitic. I'm not a huge fan of Orwell, he was kind of a snitch who turned in radicals to the British Empire, but I will say that the term Orwellian is fitting here. These tactics aren't new. We saw it in Vietnam. Peace activists were smeared as agents of the supposedly irrationally violent Viet Cong. We saw it as the Second Iraq War was popping off in 2003, when anti-war voices were immediately shunned and accused of hating America.
A week later, corporate radio groups like Clear Channel and Cumulus were ordering bans on all the things. People started trashing CDs, that guy even rented a steamroller, and calling them every name you can squeeze on Three Naked Bodies.
And we saw it during apartheid in South Africa, when world leaders fearmongered that the ANC would just bring chaos and confusion, not freedom or justice. Every time, they tell us we're siding with the wrong people, and every time, history proves that we weren't. The empire's propaganda playbook hasn't changed, and neither has the truth. So today, when pro-Palestinian voices are blacklisted, doxxed, banned, detained, deported, arrested, we're not witnessing a new phenomenon. We're watching the old machine go back to work using the same stale playbook. So all I have left to ask you is, will you fall for it again?